are going to talk about the most beautiful place imaginable. And to just get us thinking about that, I want to show you a picture of a very beautiful place here in Austin. This is the Oasis looking out over Lake Travis. And if you've ever been there, I have had so many great memories there. Now, this is just a 2D representation, right? If I could actually show you 3D, you could turn to your right, and over on the right are these gorgeous cliffs just dropping down into the lake, and they're mansions. You've seen them, right? These gorgeous mansions lining the cliffs along there. And if you look to your left, you look out over all these decks and scenic statues, and just beautiful. If we could move into a 4-dimensional experience, I could tell you about time there that I've spent. How many nights my family has enjoyed after being a day on the lake up there, laughing together and celebrating the fun we had, and music, just, there's music playing, and we were dancing and enjoying each other, and so much love. And I watched my daughter get engaged at this very spot. So many memories, and yet all I can show you is this flat 2-dimensional representation. Now, think about this for a second. As earth is to heaven, is like this 2-dimensional flat representation of the Oasis to all my real life experiences there. Do you see that? And in this series, we're trying to show what heaven might actually be like. But what you have to realize, and you've probably heard it through the stories, is that there aren't really words that you can put into 2 dimensions that can describe a 4-dimensional experience. And so we see that all the beauty and wonder and love and life of earth in reality is all a flat, black and white representation of a very real, multi-dimensional beauty and love and life experience that God has prepared for all who love Him, all who want to be with Him. Now, some of you may still be skeptical about this, all right? Even after hearing, professionals who have nothing to gain and credibility to lose, like spinal surgeons that we've interviewed up here, and next week a college professor, and this week an airline captain, and pastors. And that's why I've actually included 120 different stories in Imagine Heaven, so that you can see that this is either something amazing or this is the biggest conspiracy ever formed in history. Because they're all saying the same thing, and it lines up with what God has told us through the scriptures all along. But, some people are still going to be skeptical, and they're going to say, come on, really? An invisible place that is wonderful and beautiful? Isn't that just in your imagination? And many times when people are skeptical, they say, I believe in science. I believe in things observable. But what's ironic about that is that science is actually pointing us to the probability of heaven more and more. James Jeans, who is a famous physicist at Cambridge and Princeton, wrote this: the stream of knowledge is headed toward a non-mechanical reality. The universe begins to look more like a great thought than like a machine. And it's interesting, in physics, the Kaluza-Klein theory is a unified field theory of electromagnetism and the gravitational force that postulates an unseen 5th dimension in order for it to work. Or Brian Greene writes in The Elegant Universe about how quantum theory, what we observe in quantum mechanics and what we observe in general relativity, only fit together if there are 6 hidden dimensions to space. Now stop and think about that. If our observations in science points us to there having to be hidden dimensions in order for all our observations to make sense, why is it so hard to postulate heaven in extra dimensions beyond us and all around us? And that's what people who have had near-death experiences, or NDEs, talk about. People who have clinically died and yet been resuscitated describe to their amazement how alive they feel, like they've never felt so good. And they talk about how they don't even know they're dead. They have a body, and with heightened senses, and yet they look at their lifeless body. They observe it from above many times. And then many people talk about how then they head down a tunnel, or some describe it as a path. Dr. Mary Neal in the first week described it as this beautiful path. Others describe it as this dark tunnel or a bright tunnel. Others describe it as going through what seemed like outer space, but on a path. And in the book, Imagine Heaven, I postulate maybe this is like going through what Einstein said was a wormhole, going from one dimensionality, our dimensionality, into the dimensionality of heaven. I don't know. But what I do know is what they described is beautiful beyond words. You know, Paul, the apostle, who I talked about in week 1, probably had some kind of near-death vision of heaven, says this in 1 Corinthians 2:9. No eye has seen, no ear has heard, no mind has imagined what God has prepared for those who love him. But it was to us that God revealed these things by his Spirit. He says it's better than you can imagine, but you ought to try to imagine it. Because God has revealed these things by his Spirit so that we will live not for this life that is going to pass away. You can't hold on to it. So we will live for the life to come. And one of the things we've probably never considered is all the things we really love about this life, they come from God. And that world is not going to be completely different. It's just going to be even better. You know, like that song we sang in the verse that Lauren read, holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory. I mean, think about that. If all the beauty and the wonder and the glory we see on earth is just a finger pointing toward the glory of the Creator who made it, then why would you think that the world where things actually go according to God's way and will would be less beautiful, less tangible, less real, less vibrant? You know, the reality is this world is a wounded, marred version of God's creation. Heaven is what we knew this world should always be. In fact, it says in Romans 8:19, for all creation is waiting eagerly for that day when God will reveal who his children really are. Against its will, all creation was subjected to God's curse. In a couple weeks, I'll explain why that was actually God's mercy and love to do that. But with eager hope, the creation looks forward to the day when it will join God's children in glorious freedom from death and decay. For we know that all creation is groaning, as in the pains of childbirth, right up to the present time. Earth and this life, for all its beauty and love and wonder, labors, right? We feel it, we experience it, labors under famine and disease and hurt and decay and death and destruction. This is not the place to live for. But there is a place for us. And it's more beautiful, it's more glorious, it's more real and tangible than you've ever imagined. You know, last week I interviewed Don Piper, who was run over by an 18-wheeler, pronounced dead by EMS. Took them 90 minutes to get him out of the car. It was so squashed. And he was dead for 90 minutes. And the first week I interviewed Dr. Mary Neal, a spine surgeon, who her kayak got lodged under a waterfall, and she was dead for 30 minutes. And yet both of them talk about how alive they were and the beauty they saw on the other side. Listen.
So take us back to that day. You saw the 18-wheeler come. What was the next memory you had?
Well, I took my last breath on the bridge, and my next breath was at one of the 12 gates of heaven. I'm looking through the gates. I'm looking down the street. There is a river that flows from this throne, or this hill that's high and lifted up, and I know that's the river of life because we're told that it flows from the throne of God. So many of the things that we know and enjoy and love here are visible there as well. I would say this, and heaven's never going to be less than this. It's always going to be more.
Yeah.
In heaven, it's all big. I mean, it so far transcends any words that we could come up with here. If you want to talk about meadows and flowers and beauty, and if you want to talk about trees.
Did you see that?
Oh yes, they're just magnificent, except that they are so brilliant and so vivid as to really defy description.
So you live in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, one of the most beautiful places on earth. How did that compare to this beautiful path leading to heaven?
One of the problems that I and most people had when they came back from a near-death experience is that even the most intense beauty here on earth, even the most intense love here on earth, is very, very pale in comparison to the intensity of the love and to the intensity of the beauty in God's world. Everything was far more intense. The colors were beyond anything we could ever experience here.
Real, more alive, more beautiful than anything we could imagine. And you know, last week we talked about how what God is doing is he's creating a family of families out of everybody who turns to him and trusts him. And he wants to take us to live together with him forever. And you know, after we talked about that last week, I had people come up and say, you know, well, what about my pets? Will my pets be there? Maybe because sometimes it's easier to love our pets than our families, right? Like, that would be easier. Yeah. Well, and you know what, though? To be honest, it's like, yes. All that God created is going to be alive and renewed. In fact, Isaiah gives us this vision of this life to come in heaven. Isaiah 11:6. The wolf will live with the lamb, the leopard will lie down with the goat, the calf and the lion and the yearling together, and a little child will lead them. They will neither harm nor destroy on all my holy mountain, for the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the Lord. Yeah, of course. Everything we loved, everything God's created, it gets renewed. And this is what God is doing. This is what he was doing through his Messiah, through Jesus. He was restoring what was lost to him back to him, but not against our will. See, what Jesus was doing was removing every barrier between humans and God, every barrier except one, our pride. He won't take away your free will. And what he's doing is everyone who turns back to him and receives his forgiveness and is restored right with God, he says, not only is he leading us right with God and right with each other, but in harmony with all creation, the way we knew it should be. And you know what's fascinating is right after God says that to Isaiah, he gives a sign to know that the God who says this is true and the heaven he promises is real. Look at what it says in Isaiah 11 right after that. It says, in that day, the root of Jesse, stands for Messiah, will stand as a banner for all the peoples. The nations will rally to him. His resting place, Jerusalem, will be glorious. In that day, the Lord will reach out his hand a second time and reclaim the surviving remnant of his people, of the Jewish people he's talking about. He will raise a banner or a sign for the nations and gather the exiles of Israel. He will assemble the scattered people of Judah from the four quarters of the earth. The God who promises heaven and the beauty of heaven says he will show a sign to all the nations. And he's shown many signs in history, but this one's phenomenal. In 1948, Israel was not a nation. In fact, the Jewish people had no nation, no land, no king, no government, and they were spread across the globe. And that had happened in 70 AD. Jesus said 40 years before the Romans wiped out Jerusalem, he said, because you've rejected me and crucified your Messiah, you know, this city and temple is going to be destroyed and you'll be scattered across the globe. And for 2,000 years that was true, but God said, as a sign to all the nations, I'm going to regather them. 1948, right after the Holocaust, 1948, all of a sudden Jews from all over the globe come back and Israel is reborn overnight. Nothing like it's ever happened in history. But God said, I'm going to do this as a sign. You know, stop and think about that. We all the time say, God, give me a sign, then I'll believe. He's given us signs. Are you looking? Will you open your eyes? Will you seek? Will you search? Because he wants you to know him and love him and know how much he loves you. You know, God wants us to live for the life that's to come because it's the only one that lasts. If you do know him, I want to ask you, are you living for the life and the beauty and the love and the country that's going to last? In Hebrews chapter 11, God tells us who are truly successful in his eyes. And it's the people who live by trusting him, by trusting in his promises and what he said in his word. Look what it says, Hebrews 11. All these people died still believing what God had promised them. They were looking for a better place, a heavenly homeland. That's why God's not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. And the people we're going to hear from in this series, they've seen this land and they've seen that city. And let me just say, the successful in God's eyes who live by faith, they suffered in this life. And I just want to say for a second, because I've heard some people say things like, I want to go there now, like as in suicide. And if you've had that thought, don't think it again. God has you here for a purpose and a plan, and even through the suffering, he wants you to seek him, and he wants to use you to comfort others as well. But you can take hope. There is a hope to come. The hard part is not going to last forever. You know, it's amazing because even blind people have seen it. Ring and Cooper studied 21 blind people. I put 3 of them in the book, Imagine Heaven. Brad is one of them. He was blind from birth. When he was 8, he had a near-death experience. And for the first time, he could see. He could see color. He saw his lifeless body there. And he saw his roommate, who was also blind, who heard him struggle, get up and try to go get help. And then he said he passed through this dark tunnel. But listen how he describes it. He said, I began to wonder if it was darkness. There was no color whatsoever. But coming out into a large field, the closest I could tell you about color was that the brightness and brilliance of that whole area was absolutely indescribable. I could not distinguish fine shades of color for some reason. It's possible that I could have, but I have no vocabulary to describe it. He'd been blind since birth. I felt as if I might be entering another realm altogether, an unexplained dimension that I had very little understanding of. Brad found himself in this immense field with palm trees, giant, enormous leaves and tall grass. And he said, I was walking up this field. It seemed as if I was so exhilarated and so unbelievably renewed, I didn't want to leave. I wanted to stay forever where I was. There is no way I could describe the peace and tranquility. The weather was absolutely perfect in terms of temperature and humidity. It was so fresh, so unbelievably fresh, that mountain air on earth could not even come close. Isn't it interesting? A blind person would notice the temperature and the environment, wouldn't he? There was tremendous light up there. It seemed to come from every direction. It was all around, and everywhere I happened to be looking. It seemed like everything, even the grass I stepped on, seemed to soak in that light. It seemed like the light could actually penetrate through everything, even the leaves on the trees. There was no shade. There was no need for shade. The light was actually all-encompassing. Yet I wondered how I could know that because I'd never seen before that point. I felt like I wouldn't understand it had it happened on earth, but where I was able to accept it almost immediately. Grass, trees, fields, palm trees. Yay, I love palm trees. And what these people describe is a beauty that's not unlike earth, but with a light and with colors and with love that permeates everything.